Let's talk TradWives. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I want to talk a little bit about the TradWife trend. Now, if you are unfamiliar with this trend online, basically it is short for traditional women. It's actually kind of funny because several years ago when I first started seeing this trend come up and I was seeing it abbreviated TradWives, I thought it was standing for TradWives, and I thought it was like a weird like wife swapping polyamory thing. And then as I started looking into it, I was like, oh, no, that's not what this is at all. Kind of a blonde moment thing, but whatever. But yes, TradWife is short for traditional wife. And when I first started seeing this trend, I actually kind of got excited and thought that I was totally gonna jump on board with this, even though I'm really not a wife. But I really thought this kind of content was gonna be totally my jam, right? Because I will say a few things about me. Some of this might be surprising to some of you. If you're new to my content, you don't really know anything about me. If you are new to my content, welcome. If you're familiar with my content, you know I have a serious love for like old Hollywood vintage glamour and stuff. So kind of the 1950s housewife aesthetic, love it. Absolutely love that kind of aesthetic. I also love very traditionally girly things. Like I love cooking and baking, and I love the idea of being a stay-at-home wife. I hope to be one someday. I love crafty stuff. Like I'm a big Pinterest person. I used to be obsessed with any kind of like crafty magazines or things. I used to totally buy Martha Stewart Living back in the day when I still read magazines. I love all that stuff. When I first started hearing about like the TradWife thing, I was just sort of like, okay, this is totally gonna be my jam. There's a lot of women that tended to wear like pretty dresses, and they used to bake and cook and take care of the family, and I totally thought that was gonna be my thing. As I started to explore more of this content, I started to get a really uneasy feeling about it. And I kind of wanted to talk about this because I think I can come at this topic from a somewhat unique perspective, because I think there are a lot of women who are completely repelled by the whole idea of a traditional household and traditional family values and things like that, and just want to reject all that stuff. And I think there are also other people on the other side who believe in that stuff blindly, and I'm someone who falls somewhere in the middle. And so I think I can kind of approach this topic because the TradWife trend is very controversial because you have these two extremes. And as somebody who's somewhat in the middle of these things, somebody who I feel like this trend should appeal to but doesn't, I think I can kind of give a unique perspective on it. So the first thing that I think felt a little unsettling as I started to look into this TradWife trend, again, should be for me. I'm interested in all these kind of like homemaking skills. I love the aesthetic and everything, although I do feel like as much as a lot of the TradWife content has a vintage feel to it, it also feels very modern, which is not really my taste. I think a lot of it tends to, not all of it, but a lot of it tends to feel very like muted and subdued, which is a very trendy thing to have everything be kind of like beige and stuff like that. One of the things I love about sort of like the 1950s aesthetic is like the colors and the vibrancy. I understand that the TradWife trend currently is trying to appeal to a younger audience, and it's kind of giving that a little bit more of a, I mean, it's not modern because it's traditional, but a little bit more of like a current social media aesthetic feel, which just isn't my personal taste, which is doesn't make it right or wrong, it just isn't. I tend to like color. The second thing I want to touch on that kind of made this trend a little bit off-putting for me personally, and again, this is just myself, was I realized it was so deeply rooted in religion, particularly Christian religion. I don't have a problem with anybody who connects to organized religion or anything. I personally don't tend to connect very much with organized religion, at least not currently. I was raised Catholic, so I'm familiar with it. I don't have a lot of religious trauma specifically, although I do know a lot of people who do. I simply don't identify with organized religion right now, but I'm not personally offended by it or triggered by it. I just felt like so much of this TradWife content did tend to be so deeply rooted in religion. I like my baking and my religion in two separate categories, I guess. I don't judge anybody for wanting to express their religious views or anything. It just felt a little bit like, I don't know if I want my religion and my baking tips in the same place. But hey, that's, everybody has their own personal preference. And I don't shame or judge anybody who has a connection to religion or a certain religious organization. As long as you're being a good person, that's all that really matters to me. I do notice, oh, this is probably gonna be really controversial, but I do feel like there are a lot of people who are jumping on the Christianity bandwagon because it's trendy. Not everybody's doing that, mind you. There are some people who are genuinely connected to Christianity, and like, more power to you. If you are, I'm not judging anybody for their religious beliefs. You're allowed to have your own religious beliefs. There's religious freedom in this country. I personally consider myself more spiritual than religious, so to speak. But I've noticed that a lot of people who like I have followed or connected with or seen, you know, online or like connected with their content, who were more spiritual, are kind of now shifting towards Christianity, and it almost seems like it's becoming a trend. Now, if people are genuinely moving to Christianity and organized religion because they feel a call to it, more power to them. I'm not telling anybody what they should or shouldn't believe. But the fact that it's happening so much, it is feeling, to me at least, like it's becoming too much of a trend. I start to get a little bit leery when I see trends like this happen, as like, okay, is this people genuinely doing this because they actually feel a connection to it? Or are people doing this because they think it's going to get them a better audience, or they think it's going to boost their clout in some way or something? Like, I don't know. I think your spirituality, your religious beliefs and things, I mean, if anything in life is going to be authentic, I think it should be those. You know, whatever you feel like is authentic to you, more power to you. But I'm starting to notice a little bit of a trend there. As much as I'm not like turned off by somebody who happens to be connected to religion or use religion as a part of their content or anything, like, you can do what you want, it's your platform. But I do feel like too, when I started paying attention more to like the TradWife content, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, does there have to be a Bible verse and everything? Like, or are we just baking bread today? You know what I mean? Like, it just felt very forced, very kind of like, okay, we gotta throw it in everywhere. And sometimes I feel like when people kind of push their religion down your throat, again, like, I don't care, like, I'm rooted in what I believe and what I feel. I don't get offended by that. I don't have a lot of religious trauma, so I'm not like offended by it, but I'm a little bit like, I find when people start pushing their religion onto people and start pushing their religion onto everything, I'm like, who are you trying to convince? Are you trying to convince me to believe this, or are you trying to convince the world that you believe this? Again, I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for even saying that, but that was kind of one of my first kind of like, something feels off about the TradWife thing. Your religious beliefs are your religious beliefs. I'm not shaming you or judging you for your religious beliefs at all. I think as long as you're a good person, that's all that matters to me. So as I was like kind of following some of this TradWife content and looking into some of it, and this was actually like a while back, so like a lot of the people I was starting to kind of notice and pay attention to were not like the huge creators that are going on right now. I'm not really that super familiar with the people who are the creators in the TradWife content like currently. I've heard some names that get thrown around and things like that, but I'm not really gonna make any of this about like a specific content creator. It's just kind of like the genre in general. Another thing that started to feel kind of off-putting for me was this, and some of this is rooted in the religious aspects to it, but it was this constant serving and submitting and catering to your husband. And again, I don't have a problem if that's what people want to do, or if that's the dynamic that you want to have. It just felt very much, I really do believe that there's a difference between having a deep desire to, say, create meals for your family, or having a deep desire to make your home beautiful, to, you know, create a beautiful home so your family can grow up in a beautiful home. Like, I think that there's a difference between a desire for that and a desire to bring that into the world, and feeling like that's something that you want to do in the world, and feeling like you have to do that to satisfy your husband, or that you have to do that to submit to your husband. I think one is like a deep desire to care for your family in a certain way. And again, I'm all for traditional values. If you want to have a husband whose role is to provide and bring home the money, and your role in the relationship is to take that money and to create a beautiful home, to create beautiful meals, to, you know, to care for your kids and nurture your family. And, you know, I'm all for those traditional gender roles. But a lot of the TradWife content, at least the way it was presented, came across very much, it felt a little fetishy to me, which again, I'm not trying to kink shame anybody if that's the kind of thing you're into, but I think oftentimes, you know, if you're going to be in a relationship where you're going to submit to your husband, and it's like there's like a submission dominance thing as far as a fetish thing, totally your choice. I just think oftentimes that dynamic, it felt a little bit more like these women were slaves to their husbands, and again, in a very pretty curated way. I think it was in presentation. I actually think that probably a lot of these TradWives, that are especially the ones that are creating this content and presenting it for people, do actually enjoy what they're doing. Like, I don't think that they're actually necessarily slaves to their husbands, but it felt very much like presentation of it was this like, very vacant woman, which these women, my guess is, I mean, I'm thinking if they're actually creating these successful social media platforms, they're probably not vacant, but they come across as these very vacant women who are basically like, my husband asked me for this, so I'm going to do this. And it was like, it didn't feel, to me at least, like these women had this like deep desire to make a meal. And that was one of the reasons why I used to watch a lot of like the Food Network shows back in the day when they did a lot more cooking shows and stuff. And I used to be really into that. And I was into it because a lot of the Food Network stars, they all had personalities and they were vibrant, and it was like they're excited to cook something and you would get excited to cook something, and like there was a lot of personality to it. Whereas I started to feel like a lot of these TradWives were very vacant, and I think some of this might be the trend in the presentation. I personally, and again, this is just me personally, if you're into it, that's cool. I'm not into like ASMR and stuff. That's just not my thing, right? Like I know some people find it very relaxing. Some people are really into it. It was a huge trend for a while. I've never been into ASMR. I find a lot of these TradWives have like an ASMR voice. Like, I asked my husband what he wanted for lunch. Like, I asked my husband what he wanted for dinner, and he said he wanted a steak. So I'm going to go out and kill the cow and grind the meat. And it felt so zombie-like, and it felt like the whisper voice, which I do know, I've heard this, and I actually watched the documentary about the Duggards, and a lot of these religious groups kind of get women to have this sort of very like soft baby voice. I personally find that really annoying. And if that's your natural voice, I'm not trying to insult you. If it's not your natural voice and you're trying to put on a presentation of it, please stop. Just please stop. Please speak normal. Like, speak in your normal voice. Like, whatever it is. Use your words and speak like a normal person. I personally have a really hard time with that kind of like the vacantness. If I'm gonna watch someone cook something or bake something or talk about crafting things or give household tips or something, like, I want somebody with some energy and personality, and I want it to feel like this person actually enjoys what they're doing. And it's not necessarily that I think these TradWives don't enjoy their life. Some of them very much might, but it just feels so like monotone, and it feels so robotic to me. Very Stepford wife thing. And I talk a lot about masculine and feminine energies, and I'm not going to dive into masculine and feminine energies as much in this video, but it's not really embodying feminine energy, because like feminine energy is very chaotic. It's very in flow. It's very moving. It's very vibrant. Feminine energy is life force energy. It's loving life. It can be the dark and the light. It can be all over the place, and a very monotone, directional, that's very masculine. And again, I'm not shaming these women for being more in their masculine energy, but I think oftentimes we tend to look at that as, oh, they're so feminine because they're soft-spoken, they're very monotone, just cooking the way that they are in these tasks where it's just kind of like, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3, which I realize they're probably doing for curated content. Like, feminine energy cooking would literally be all over the place. You would get highs and lows, you would get this, you would get taste testing, you would get like, this is so good. Oh, this is like, that's feminine energy. Feminine energy is very chaotic. It's all over the place. You typically need, if you are going to cook something, and I've talked about this before, like cooking from a very masculine place, which is what a lot of these women are doing, is literally like step 1, step 2, step 3. This is when things need to be done, so this is when I'm going to start, this is the structure, this is the organization. It's kind of like the recipe. You need that. You absolutely need the masculine structure in anything you're doing. The feminine energy is the flavor, the tasting, the pleasure, the creativity, the like, ooh, let me add a little bit of this, oh, let me taste this, oh, does this need more salt, ooh, let's try this herb. You know what would be really cool if we put this spice in here because this would be good. It's kind of all over the place. It's creativity, it's adding stuff, it's sensuality, it's pleasure, it's taste testing. Things like that. Like, that's the feminine energy of things. Now, if you only had feminine energy, you may never actually get something on the table, and God only knows what you'd even get, right? If you only had masculine energy, you're probably going to get a finished product, but it might not have that like flavor, that essence, right? That was kind of where the TradWife thing was kind of losing me, because I was like, these women are showing up, they're wearing their pretty dresses, they're looking very feminine, but they've got this very like soft-spoken, monotone, very even keel way about them, which is actually very masculine. Again, they're doing everything step by step by step by step because they're in service to their partner. The masculine is in service. I know a lot of people get upset with me when I say this. If you think about the most masculine careers in the world, you think about like law enforcement, military, things like that. What do? They protect and serve. The masculine protects and provides. Providing is service. They are in service to their partner. They're in service to the feminine. The masculine is in service to the feminine. So if you are in service to your husband, you're actually in the masculine. So the fact that these women are very much like, I'm in service to a man, feminine isn't really in service. Feminine is life force energy, creativity. Now that doesn't mean that what the feminine brings to a relationship isn't incredibly valuable and incredibly powerful, but it's not a slave. The feminine is not a slave to anybody. The feminine doesn't bow down to anybody. The feminine is energy, vitality. So the TradWife trend in general is not really super feminine, even though it's given a very, what we see nowadays is a very feminine aesthetic. So I think that that's where it started to kind of lose me, was the fact that for me, and this might be an age thing, I don't know, or just a personality thing, but I needed more personality. I needed more vibrancy. I needed more energy. And I understand some people might find it inspirational or aspirational, and that's cool. It was not really embodying feminine energy, and I was finding it not very interesting, especially because, again, the more modern aesthetic tends to be very muted and very soft, and I understand that. It's a trend. It's fine. It probably appeals more to younger people. I like color, vibrancy, things like that, and I also like things with more personality. So it was just kind of becoming very uninteresting to me, and I was also starting to feel like it was starting to feel very preachy, and I'm not talking about religious-wise, but very like, I'm better than you because I do this, which I don't like. Because as much as, look, I would love it if I found a husband who would buy me a big, beautiful kitchen and I could just cook all day. Like, I love to do that stuff. I would love to do more traditional stuff. I love to be crafty. I love all that stuff. Like, I've never been somebody who's like, I want to be like a corporate girly, which is why I thought some of this stuff would very much appeal to me. But I also understand that that's not what every woman wants. And I also understand that that's not feasible for every woman. I mean, I don't have that life right now. Even women who are married are sometimes not in situations where that life is possible. Not all the TradWife content, but there are some TradWife content creators that do give across this attitude of like, I do this, so I'm better than you. I'm a better person than you because I do this. I don't really like that attitude with anything, because I think we're all different, we're all unique, everybody's got a different path. There are some women who are gonna love to be in a more traditional relationship. There are some people who that's just not meant for them. I don't really want to be looking at content or anything, like even if it's something that I would like to do or desire to do. Every week I bake a loaf of bread, and I only eat bread if I eat, because I've talked a lot about my food issues in the past and things like that. I used to be like so carb free, and I'm healing my relationship with food. That's a whole rabbit hole I'm not gonna get into. But I only eat bread that I bake myself. So every week I pick a day and I do my food prep and I bake a loaf of bread. I never in my life would ever sit here and say I'm better than you because I bake my own bread. You wanna bake bread, I encourage you to do it, because I actually think it's fun and I enjoy baking the bread and then eating it. If you don't want to do that, if that is not something you want to spend your time doing, or maybe you'd like to do it, but it's just not, you know, a top priority for you right now and you have more important things to do, that's fine. I would never project that onto you as like, I'm better than you because I do this thing, or I'm better than somebody because I desire to do this, or because I have this belief system. And I've seen that with some of the TradWife content. Not all of it, not every creator, but there are definitely creators out there that have this, I'm better than you because I do this. And I find that very off-putting. I mean, I would find that off-putting in any kind of content. So that's just something I've noticed. There's also the inauthenticity of some of it, because it's curated content online. And I want to state this by saying that I don't mean to attack the TradWife trend for this, because I think most content online, and I hope that people are more awake to this now, but I fear that not enough people are awake to this. Most content online, especially with like big creators, is highly curated. So it's not like that glimpse into people's everyday life. I used to buy into it. I used to buy into this like a day in a life, or what I eat in a day, or what I do in a day, or things like that. I used to buy into that as being absolutely real until I you know, I'm not gonna say I was old, I got older because I was older when this stuff was going on, but you know, as I got to know it more and I got to know more about being a content creator and things, I realized how curated so much of this stuff is. This TradWife content, well, I'm not saying that these women don't do some of these things in their everyday life. It's not real life, and some of it is just completely unrealistic. Now, I don't necessarily want to attack the TradWife content for this specifically, because at the end of the day, I think most creators are doing this. I think there's a lot of creators out there that are presenting a life that is not real, like it's not really what they're doing. They're just presenting it this way, or they're presenting it because they're in specific situations where they can make this happen, but the average person couldn't make it happen, but they're making it seem more attainable. Somebody pointed out that there was a TradWife creator. I didn't see this video, I just saw someone comment on this. There was like a content creator who said something like she asked her like toddler what they wanted for lunch, and they said a grilled cheese sandwich. So then the next thing you know, this TradWife content creator was like baking bread and then doing everything from scratch. And it's like, well, that's not really realistic when you have when a toddler tells you what they want to eat, and then it's like, okay, baking bread takes like all day. So like, you would have to have the bread ready. Like, you can't ask a toddler what they want to eat and then like 12 hours later give them a meal, because by the time you get to that time period, they're gonna want something different. Like, that's just not feasible. And I realize that that's probably created just for social media, but it kind of presents this idea that this TradWife is just constantly ready to cater to anything their kids want or anything their husband wants at any moment's notice, and that they can just whip up homemade bread or whip up homemade cereal or homemade ice cream or homemade whatever, just like that. When it's like, a lot of the stuff they're doing takes time, like a lot of time. So if you are going to do this, you're going to have to invest a lot of time in doing this. And if you want to do this and if you want to be inspired by this, great. But also understand that this stuff takes a significant amount of time. You're not going to be able to just sit around and, you know, have your husband be like, hey, I'd like this meal, and then you start making this from scratch for him. It's like, well, he's probably going to want 3 meals before you get done with making this one from scratch, you know what I mean? But this kind of content sets up, first of all, very unrealistic expectations for women, that women should just have all the time in the world to do all these things from scratch. And I've also seen this pointed out too, is these TradWives never show the dirty, messy, ugly parts of what they do. And some of them honestly make enough money, so they maybe hire people to do that less appealing stuff, which is fine, but that's not really feasible for most people. So most women, if you're gonna be a stay-at-home mom, or even if you're not, even if you're working full-time, you're gonna have to clean the toilets, you're gonna have to, you know, clean out the shower drain. You're gonna have to do the messy stuff. Your life is probably not all gonna be like, let's make cereal from scratch, you know what I mean? And if you wanna make cereal from scratch, or you wanna bake your own bread, or you wanna, you know, make, you know, pie crusts from scratch or things like that or whatever, like, more power to you. I love doing that kind of stuff. But I'm also not gonna like drop everything in my day because somebody's like, hey, I feel like an apple pie. So I'm like, okay, well, let me go out to the orchard and pick some apples and then come back in and you know, and bake a pie crust and whatever. It's like, it sets up this expectation for women that like, not only do you have to do all of the messy stuff that we don't see on social media, the kind of the ugly parts of just life and housework and things like that, but you're also expected to do all these other things from scratch and at the drop of a hat too. So it sets up this unrealistic expectations on women, but also it sets up these very unrealistic expectations that men have, because I think a lot of this TradWife content tends to be kind of like softcore porn for men. A lot of them kind of will have this fantasy about this wife who somehow shows up in full makeup, although it always looks natural, like she's not wearing anything. And in fact, a lot of these TradWives I look at and I'm like, they try to make it look like they just rolled out of bed, and a lot of them probably did, because a lot of them obviously had their lips done, fillers, Botox, they have their face done, so they just put on like a natural makeup look, so it looks like they just effortlessly look like that. So a lot of men think these women like just effortlessly look like that, when at the end of the day, these women probably took a lot of maintenance to make themselves look effortless. And they put themselves in these very kind of like sexy dresses with like cleavage and their whatever, and they're in the kitchen and they're baking everything from scratch, and they're anything their husband wants to just cater to them. And it becomes this kind of like this fetish for men, and men start to think that like this is feasible Because why can't every woman do this? When at the end of the day, the only reason why these women are able to do this is, for one, because they're content creators. So they're doing this for they probably have a camera crew there. They're making money off of this. But even the ones that aren't making money off of it, or even if they are making money off of it, a lot of it was feasible because they had husbands who were willing to finance their career. I mean, like, a lot of the husbands have like the stable jobs that pay the mortgage, that, you know, get the health insurance, that are the ones that have that like stability and are making enough money so these women can stay home and can afford to grow their social media brand, because it does cost a lot of money to grow a social media brand. I can tell you that. Like, I keep my costs to an absolute minimum because I don't make a ton of money. I definitely don't make as much as these TradWives, and I try to keep my costs as low as possible, and it's still really expensive to do this kind of stuff. They have husbands that are able to fund this stuff until they get enough money with their content in order to fund it themselves. But they typically have husbands who make it possible for this to happen. Unfortunately, it's men in the world that watch this content, that fetishize this content, that think that that's possible. Like, why can't I have a woman that does that? It's like, well, but do you have the money to finance that kind of a lifestyle? Most of them probably don't, but it becomes a fetish. Now, I have also heard, and I mentioned this in my video about like dating and politics, is that there are women who make this content and present themselves as these very like pure virginal housewives and stuff, that create this kind of like TradWife content and then secretly have OnlyFans accounts. Not secretly, but they kind of like funnel these guys into their OnlyFans accounts because again, it's a fetish thing, right? And I'm not saying all TradWives do that, but like that is a thing that's happening, so just be aware of it. And it's definitely not just the TradWife content that is presenting a very inauthentic lifestyle that's setting people's expectations up for disappointment. A lot of social media content in a lot of different areas is doing that. I'm simply pointing out that this is also happening in TradWife content, so I think it's something to be aware of. I've seen a lot of men online get upset with like, why are women so upset with the TradWife trend? There's a difference between a woman showing up to her social media and saying like, hey, I really love to bake, I really love to cook, I really love to make these things for my family, let me show you how I bake an apple pie from scratch. Cool. I don't think that many people out there would be offended by that. Cool, it's content. Not every woman's gonna be into it. Some women are. Some women are gonna be indifferent to it. Some women might be like, why would you waste your time doing that? But because it's just not their thing, whatever. It's a different thing from that to a woman showing up to social media and being like, my husband really wants an apple pie, so I'm gonna bake him an apple pie from scratch. It's the way it's presented. And again, it's not wrong to want to bake your husband his favorite pie. Like, it's not wrong, it's not weird. But the presentation of it, especially with the very common TradWife like robotic delivery, which kind of has this kind of like Stepford wife zombie kind of aspect to it, and this very sort of monotone, very directional kind of attitude where you don't really see the woman really getting any joy and pleasure from this, and showing up and basically saying like, I'm doing everything my husband wants because I need to make him happy. That's a different thing than a woman being like, hey, I really want to make an apple pie because it's my husband's favorite and I'm really excited to make him a pie because I know he'll love it. You see the difference there? You see the difference between a woman being like, hey, my husband really loves apple pies and I'm really excited because I really want to bake a pie today and I want to surprise him with an apple pie, to a woman being like, I want to make an apple pie for my husband because it's his favorite and I really want to make him happy so he won't leave me. See how there's a different angle there? Like, there's some things implied there. And granted, you could fake either one, I mean, for presentation, and some of it might just be the trend or something like that. But there's a different energy there. There's a different energy with like, I'm excited to do something for my partner, or I really love doing this and I want to do something nice for my partner kind of thing. Like, I really love baking and I want to bake my husband's favorite dessert. Like, that's a different energy than like, my husband wants this, so I'm gonna give him this because this is what he wants. You see the different energy there? Funny thing is that I used to watch Ina Garten, the Barefoot Contessa, and she used to have this running joke that her husband loved chicken. Like, he loved eating chicken, and most dinners he would prefer to have chicken. So she would talk about making him dinner, and it usually involved chicken. And nobody got really offended by that. Like, nobody was upset that like, ugh, why does she keep giving her husband chicken just because he wants chicken? Because it never felt like she felt like she had to serve him chicken in order to keep him around. But when you have content creators that are presenting this idea of like, I have to keep my husband happy because that's the only way that this relationship works, because I have to solely serve my husband, that's gonna feel off-putting to a lot of people. I don't know if I've ever talked about this on my channel, but I did talk about this on a podcast that I was a guest on. When we talk about traditional in relationships, and I realize that the concept of traditional implies that there is a standard, but that's not actually the case, right? Like, there are different traditions out there. There are different ways that people can look at tradition. So like, for example, I look at my grandparents. I'm thinking of one set of grandparents in particular who I consider very traditional people. My grandfather, he went out and worked, he did physical labor. He did all kinds of very traditionally masculine things. He, you know, built the house that they lived in. He built most of the furniture. He built his own barn, so we had a wood shop. Like, he was a very traditional man in the sense that if there was physical labor happening, he was doing it. He had a very masculine mindset. My grandmother was very traditional. She was a creative. She loved crafting. She loved cooking and baking, and she was a homemaker and all these kind of things. But like, I never saw their dynamic as like my grandfather lording that power over my grandmother. Like, they had a mutual respect for each other and the roles that each other played. And it was never like that my grandmother was like serving my grandfather or like submitting to him, or that he lorded power over her or anything like that, or like that he had to be served first in the family or whatever. And again, if those are the traditions that you want to uphold and you both, you know, both people in the relationship agree on those, that's fine. When I think of traditional relationships, that's not what I think of. I don't think of a man being the superior person in the household and the woman basically just showing up in service to him. That's not something I've ever seen, and it's not my attitude of traditional. I think you can embody traditional gender roles, but both actually value the roles that each of you are doing. Even though you're bringing different things to the relationship, you're also appreciating the value that each of you is bringing, even though it might be different. So I've never bought into sort of this TradWife trend of this idea of just basically doing anything just to serve your husband solely because he's a man kind of thing. For me, it just feels a little bit strange. Now, I'm sure there's gonna be people in the room, well, that's why you're single, whatever. That's fine if you wanna think that. That's not why I'm single, but like, it's fine if you wanna think that. But frankly, I would rather be single than be in a relationship where I felt like I had to spend my time constantly serving a man, because that sounds more like a child to me than does an actual full-grown man. It's not to say that any idea of what is traditional is necessarily right or wrong. It's simply knowing what your idea of traditional is. Or, you know, if you don't want to be in a traditional relationship, that's fine too. As long as both people are on the same page, that's the important thing. You get into trouble in relationships when you've got two people that are just not on the same page about what the dynamic is going to be in your relationship. And again, I'm not triggered by the TradWife content. If you enjoy the TradWife content or anything, or you want to be a TradWife or whatever, anything like that, I would suggest, if you are going to get into a traditional relationship, specifically one where your husband is making all the money and he is the sole provider, and you are going to stay at home and you're going to, you know, have a home, raise kids, you're going to have a more traditional dynamic in that sense. My biggest piece of advice for you would be to be very, very selective and very careful about who you enter into that relationship with, because it can go wrong very quickly. And as a woman, you can end up getting very hurt in that situation if you choose the wrong partner. The only way that that dynamic works is if you choose the right partner. And I hate to be like, choose better, like, and use that as an excuse, but at the end of the day, it's very risky as a woman. It can put you in a very vulnerable situation. I don't like to have to say that. I don't. I really do wish that there were more men, and there are men like this out there that do exist, but you have to make sure that you're dealing with a man that is like this. I do believe there are men out there who take the role of being a provider very seriously and don't use it to abuse their partner. Unfortunately, there are men out there who will use that to abuse your partner, and that is why it is so, so important as a woman to use discernment and to make sure that you are with a man that you can trust. It can get really dangerous if you don't go into this with your eyes wide open. So that would be my suggestion when it comes to this kind of stuff. I just thought this was an interesting analysis because I felt like I was somebody who totally would get on board with the TradWife trend, and like it would totally be my thing. And then as I started to learn more about it, I was just really kind of like, I wasn't triggered by it or anything. I mean, I'm not mad that it exists, but I started to find it really off-putting and I couldn't really figure out why. And so I just thought maybe sharing with you why I was finding this trend to be a little bit more off-putting. I just thought some of this information might be useful for you if maybe you are into it or you're not into it, or you're starting to question it, or maybe you were into it and you're starting to think, oh, I don't know about this anymore, or maybe it is resonating with you, maybe it's not. I just thought this might be kind of an interesting analysis to share with you. So do you guys have any thoughts on the TradWife trend? Again, I don't necessarily think it's all bad, but I do think that it's something to be leery of and not necessarily follow blindly. And if you're not into it, even if you think that you should be into it, like, don't stress about it. You can still embody traditional values and still want a traditional relationship and still enjoy more like traditionally feminine things and not be on board with the TradWife trend. It's not like you have to love the TradWife trend if you are somebody who wants a traditional relationship. There's overlap there, but it's not the same thing. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on the TradWife trend or anything I mentioned in this video or any video requests, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you and I love your video suggestions. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you would like to embody your dark feminine energy, I highly suggest you check out my guided journal. It's available on Amazon. And if you'd like to connect your creativity, which can help you with anything, you know, like cooking or creating or crafting or anything like that, if you are into those things, I have a masterclass, The Art of Feminine Creativity. Details for all of those things, all my masterclasses and courses, are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.